Hi there. I'm here with James McQuivey from Forrester today. Hi, James.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Very good. Nice to be here with you.
It's very great to chat with you. And today we have a special interviewer. Jeff Cram, the co-founder and chief strategy officer of iSafe Design, is going to be interviewing James today. So, hey, Jeff.
Hi there. Hi, James.
Hi there.
So, Jeff, I will let you take it away and talk about digital disruption with James.
Wonderful. Well, nice to meet you in person, James, over the chat. I feel like we're all friends. I just got done listening to you read the audio version of your book, Digital Disruption. So
If you've heard enough of my voice, I'm sure.
you've been chatting in my ear for a few days now, but it's a fantastic book. And Delight, the conference is October 6th and 7th in Portland, Oregon. We're thrilled to have you as our keynote for the second day. We're going
Thank
to
you.
see you in person this fall in Portland. Your topic, of course, is the center of headlines today across every business publication we look at, and it's really relevant to what we're putting together for Delight. Disruption and innovation is at the center of how businesses are rethinking great customer experiences. So I'd love, obviously, to hear a little bit more and share with share with the conference attendees what you've been working on at Forrester Research. You're VP, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research on the topic of digital disruption, but tell us a little bit about how your role at Forrester Research and how this topic of digital disruption really became front and center for you.
So it's an interesting journey that even got me into this company, much less into this kind of research. I do mention this in the book, so I guess I'm plagiarizing myself here, but I feel like digital disruption comes naturally to me. In the seventh grade, took out all of my paper route money and bought myself a computer, which back then, the only thing I could afford was an Atari 400. Most people listening to this won't even know what that was, but it was a pretty exciting introduction to the world of computing. And even then, I had to deal with this question of ROI, because my parents, when they found out that I'd taken out all that money and used it to buy a computer of all things, and then told them that this computer was the future, they said, well, what can you do with it? And I had to say, I'm not quite sure yet, but trust me, this is going to be big. Everyone's going to have one of these things. So I still feel like I'm in that role a little bit. I'm out there snapping up or testing out those new things that I'm confident are going to be big in some way, shape, or form. And people are always asking me, well, what's your proof? How do you know this is going to be big? And actually, my work at Forrester, I joined Forrester in 1998. And what's happened in that time is I have been able to find the data now, the decades worth of data that we've collected nearly, that helps us identify what people really will do with these technologies and start to anticipate what they'll do with the next round of technologies. And this has been my role at Forrester for all these years in different teams, is to be looking at what changes in consumer behavior are likely to come. How do we explain those changes? How do we anticipate them? And then obviously, how do we take advantage of them, or at least not get beaten up by those changes? And about 3 years ago, I remember I was working with my boss, a man named Mark Mulligan, who has since left Forrester and is a music industry analyst and expert, great guy. And Mark said to me, this work that you're doing across a variety of industries, at the time I was focusing on media businesses, which is a longtime love of mine, seeing how they were being disrupted, whether it's the music business, the TV business, and other industries. And he said, it feels like you're talking about disruption. And at first I resisted that notion. I thought, that's really almost cliche to fall into the use of the word disruption. And he said, I really think you're talking about disruption, but you're talking about an accelerated type of disruption. So I got out my copy of Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, which actually is probably on the shelf here somewhere behind me. And I read back through it, and I said, actually, he's right. I am talking about disruption, the kind that Christensen has been preaching about now for then 20 some odd years. But what I'm talking about is a kind of disruption that is cheaper to do, easier to accomplish, and as a result will be spread across many more industries and will cause significantly more disruption in total than any one of these old school industrial age disruptions that we might have considered in the past. And that was really the impetus for me to realize, if we're talking about disruption, but we're talking about an accelerated type of disruption, what do we call it? And that led us to the title Digital Disruption, which has been my work here for the last 3 years at Forrester, is trying to understand what's unique about digital disruption, first of all, and then how to do it, second of all, but a big second, because there's a lot in that category.
That's fantastic. And that paper route that invested in the computer, that could have gone a different way if you entered the journalism industry and got stuck in a business model that needed some disruption. But,
absolutely, it's a great thing I got out of newspapers at the age of 12.
That's great. That was the smartest decision you probably made. But I mean, it's such a great topic for the Light of Comments, because you mentioned consumer expectations changing. One of the things in the book is, I think the timing of, disruption's been a topic for a while, and Clay's book has been in the news even recently with folks poking at this notion of disruption again. And I think that one of the things in the book we talk about is how these shifting consumer expectations are changing so rapidly, and how the barriers are coming down so fast. I'm just wondering, from a timing perspective, as we think about disruption in 2014, maybe you can kind of set the table for where there is this perfect storm of barriers coming down, the consumer expectations changing, and kind of specifically from a customer experience perspective, which is, I know, the orientation of the conference, how does a marketer or anyone in charge of product or business strategy think about disruption differently today, given these changes?
The most important thing that I think I am able to communicate to marketers is to realize that the rate of change has changed. And it's not just in the business. It's not just that businesses can innovate more rapidly using digital tools, and of course they can, and I talk about that at length. But it's that the consumer is ready to behave in new ways, to seize upon new behaviors and new experiences at a more rapid pace than we've ever seen before. My academic training in my doctoral work in the 90s was actually focused on consumer technology adoption. One of my first most important nationwide surveys I conducted as a graduate student was about people's use of the then new technology, the CD-ROM. And it was a fascinating study, but it was incredibly hard to find people in the country who had a CD-ROM, because even though it had been out at 5 years, I think, by the time I was doing that study, maybe 4, very, very few had them around the country. And it meant that finding them so I could survey them was a real challenge. And that's the way technology has always been in the past. And as a result, behaviors that need to change along with technology have always been perceived as things that would take decades to change. And it was correct historically. So that when we get to 2001, when Apple introduces the iPod, the first iPod, and in 2 years manages to sell 1 million of them. Well, that was actually tremendously successful. It was faster than prior technologies. None of the other MP3 players before it sold that many. And importantly, though, what we learned from that is that Apple was realizing that it wasn't just getting people to buy the device that they were successful with. It was getting them to change the way they consumed music. That behavioral component.
Apple and the music industry was really interesting because of some recent briefing I saw you do on Amazon Prime, and then move into the music industry. And I thought, specifically as we look at the Light as a conference for customer-obsessed companies and a focus on customer experience, Amazon has that reputation of being a company that's ruthlessly focused on the customer experience. And I think the really into Amazon Prime Music is an interesting example of a company making, perhaps a smart and adjacent customer-focused move. And I'm just wondering how you look at that evolution of a company like Amazon continuing to push in the territory to challenge other incumbents, and what they can now do from a disruptive perspective, using customer experience as a lens by which they're making these decisions.
What's interesting about Amazon's approach is that it's easy to say you're customer first or customer obsessed. A lot of companies say that. But what's very interesting about Amazon is that they seem to go through the process of thinking through just what is it about this process that we could improve on the behalf of the customer. And that sounds so simple. Maybe it is simple, but most companies aren't organized or optimized to do that. And so from a marketer, if you're trying to think it through, it's really just changing your perception of what your role is. Is your role to make a better product, or a better product experience, or a better app, or whatever it is your job is? or is your job, your responsibility, to solve the customer's problem? And that's a really simple difference when it's stated out loud like that, but it seems that some companies manage to pull that off. They manage to make that shift from, well, I'm going to make a better product, which is a nice, lofty goal, and then in 1995 it was probably a great goal. But now that we move into the present, it's not going to be enough, because there are enough people out there who are building experiences that are better than yours, that are solving more problems than yours more conveniently than yours. And so what we find is that companies like an Amazon, who are thinking about how do we just keep adding value by solving problems or removing friction or by removing decisions that are complicated and making them simple. It feels like so many times I go into work with a company who is saying, how do we build the next big thing? And I say, don't build the next big thing. Build the next needed thing that your customer really wants, whether it's small or big, and then keep doing that over and over. And eventually you'll find yourself having built the future of your customer experience. And interestingly enough, it'll start to look a lot more like a relationship than it is a marketing offer and a transactional response, which is how we've historically looked at consumer marketing experiences.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's so funny because even positioning our conference as delights that brass ring and that the aspirational endpoint that I think every brand probably wants to get to. But the gap between folks that talk about delight and the folks that actually structure themselves around some of the things you just mentioned is significant still, and I think there's still a lot of companies that talk about customer experience without actually changing the way that they do business or that they think about bringing products to market to serve real customer needs. I'm really excited that not only are you keynoting the second day, but you're going to be doing a workshop later in the day that's a 3-hour hands-on session on how brands can start to activate some of this disruptive thinking. Can you give us an idea of kind of what attendees can expect from both the talk you're doing in the morning and your hands-on workshop that afternoon?
Well, absolutely. In the morning, the hope is to just make it clear what the principles of digital disruption are, respecting the fact that the consumer is already changing, already moving ahead in this direction, and then joining them in that disruption by using the kinds of digital tools and platforms that the customer has basically taught themselves over the last few years, and all you have to do is meet them on their terms. So we'll talk about that, use some examples, identify the hooks into the customer that you can identify to deliver value to them. Then in the afternoon, what we'll want to do is say, all right, what specific value are you in a position to offer to your specific customer? Because it's really nice to talk about giving customers value, but you have to know which customer. You have to know what they value, and then you have to know what it is that you as a company will derive strategically if you deliver that benefit to that customer. So there's just a series of steps that we'll talk through as we learn how to look for innovative adjacent possibilities or adjacent solutions that we can provide for the customer. And then only are we in a position to start talking about the benefits, the products, the outcomes of this process. What might that look like in an app? What might that look like in a digital relationship? What might that look like in a product if that's what you're designing? All of those steps that we usually start with, we say, what does the product look like? And then we figure out who it's for and all those things. That's backward. And so in the experience that we'll have together, we'll cover it probably more from a marketing perspective. We'll say, all right, what's the marketing experience only after we've decided who it's for, what they want out of life, what we're going to get if we give it to them, and then we'll design that experience with all of those things in mind. And you'd be surprised at how many log jams just that simple inversion of the brainstorm process can break through.
That's fantastic. I think one of the great things about the attendees that will be at the conference, which will be great for the workshop, is that it's not just marketers. We've got user experience, customer experience professionals, we've got technologists, we've got product folks, and I think we both have the makers and the folks that plan this type of change, and I think getting them in one room for your workshop specifically is going to be a really interesting mix.
That's actually a really good point. The invitation would be to bring those different functions into that same workshop specifically so that they can all realize that they need to orient their process from customer benefits strategy, and then product outcome. Whether it's a marketing experience, whether it's a CX that you're designing, or whether it's actually a product, it kind of doesn't matter which role you have in the organization. You're going to need to think of it this way. In fact, one of the outcomes of the workshop is that you give each other a language now for brainstorming what to do next in service of your customer. That someone comes up with an idea. Well, we want to do this campaign, or we want to design the product this way, or we want to do this user experience. And then it allows you to say, okay, who's it for? What benefit are you delivering them? What is it going to do for us? And then, okay, now let's refine what it will look like and feel like in order to meet those expectations and criteria.
Fantastic. Well, we're really looking forward to having you out in Portland. Have you spent much time in Portland?
Not much. I'm very excited to be there.
Okay, it's a very disruptive city in its own right, and if you're around Sunday night with that Atari background, there's a special event that you can't quite yet announce. It's right up your alley for retro video games. So
excellent. All right.
Meaning to see. Well, yeah. To remind everybody, the Light Conference is coming up October 6th and 7th in Portland, Oregon. We still have space if you're looking to join us and hear James and other fantastic speakers speak. James, thank you so much for both being part of this event this year, and look forward to meeting in person. And taking the time for this interview. We really appreciate it.
I look forward to it. We'll see everyone there in October.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Katie.